I'm Liam Fragopoulos Billingham.
I'm just George Fragopoulos.
Oh, Jesus Christ. This is Oeuvre Busters. Come on. No, I love Gaston. That guy got a bad
He's really
rap.
the hero of that film. Here's my hot take on Beauty and the Beast.
That beast is just a beast, but Gaston's just like a nice
the 30th
aristocrat.
anniversary of that film is probably coming up. You might want to start work on that essay.
Speaking of anniversaries, you know who was born 100 years ago this year?
Who?
Do you know? Toshiro Mifune.
No, I know. I knew. I was just trying to
You didn't fucking know. Who's one of the two subjects of season 4, which we're starting with this episode. Season 4 is on the 16 films made in collaboration between Akira Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune. George, I have to say, this is a nice change of pace from our season on Batman. Thoughts?
I'm very much looking forward to watching these films. And
have you seen many of them?
You know, it's funny because to prep for this episode, I was sleeping on my couch.
Nice, good.
I was napping.
It shows.
I was napping, and I was thinking to myself, which films have I seen? And initially, so of the Kurosawa Mifune collaborations, I think I've only actually seen 3 or 4, and I've seen 1 or 2 other Kurosawa films.
Wow, you've only seen 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I've seen.
Do you know which ones?
I've seen Rashomon. Which
Nice.
is actually the first Kurosawa film that I ever saw, and I have to actually thank my brother for that too, because I remember maybe I saw it when I was like 12 or 13, so my brother's a couple of years older, so he might have been in college at that point. Maybe he was taking like a film class, and he was like, "You have to watch this film," and I did.
Yeah, makes sense.
Watched it on VHS, and I was like, "Wow, this film is fucking."
Where'd you get
amazing.
the VHS?
I forgot what the video store was called. There was a video store that was literally up the block from my house, the house I grew up in.
Amazing.
So I just wandered in, like, I'll take Rashomon, like maybe $2.99. I doubt it was even $2.99. It's probably even less than that.
Yeah, it'd be like $1, you'd hope.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Come on.
So
what are the
other
ahead,
Kurosawa film that I saw around the same time that really blew my mind was Ron, which obviously.
Wow, you saw Ron and Rashomon before Seven Samurai.
Yes. So those are like my first 2 Kurosawa films. And then eventually, and then like maybe 2 or 3 years later, I saw Seven Samurai again on VHS. And I'm pretty sure if I remember it correctly, like on 2 VHS tapes, because you always forget how long that film is. It really is
Which
epic.
one?
The Seven Samurai.
Yeah, it's 3 hours,
It's
20.
3 plus, yeah.
It's very long. I saw it at IFC Center probably almost 10 years ago on like July 3rd.
For the first time?
It was like the holiday weekend. No. So the first time I saw it was in high school. My sister's history teacher was hosting a series on Kurosawa at the public library.
Nice.
And so like I went, it was like the first time I'd gone to like what you would describe as like a cinephilic kind of event. Like God bless libraries in like my small Republican town where like the history teacher was like, we're going to watch Kurosawa movies and talk about them. So like I went to see Seven Samurai and was like blown away. And I think like was so anxious about like not knowing what I was talking about, but made a comment about how there was a shot that reminded me of Saving Private Ryan. He was like, that's astute. So like I probably was 16. So I saw that one. And then in my 20s watched Rashomon. I got really obsessed with the urban films, for lack of a better word. So Stray Dog, High and Low, which is probably top movies of all time for me. High and Low is probably my favorite. And so I've seen a lot of these. I haven't seen them all. I only saw Yojimbo for the first time recently, which is kind of insane.
Yojimbo's amazing. I don't think I've seen.
It's great.
Sanjuro, right, is the sequel.
Sanjuro's the sequel, which we'll be talking about.
And that's the one I haven't seen.
I think for me, there's sort of like every decade of my life, I've come back to these movies in some way or some form, which is like kind of exciting. And I've read Akira Kurosawa's autobiography, Something Like an Autobiography, which is like someone bought me, an ex-girlfriend's sister bought me a first edition of that book, of the translation of that book in English, and I have it, and it's really, really good. Let's very briefly, there are a lot of things you can read about Kurosawa and Mifune. There's documentaries, there's films. You can read Kurosawa's biography, which talks about meeting Mifune, but just very quickly, Akira Kurosawa was a Japanese film director. He was born in 1910 in Tokyo, And he grew up with parents that loved foreign films and the cinema, and it shaped his life. There's a lot more to him than that. Toshiro Mifune, I don't know if you know this, George, he was not born in Japan.
I found out about that yesterday while I was reading his Wikipedia page. Yes.
He was born in China to Japanese parents, and he didn't step foot in Japan until he was almost 20, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about in terms of the fact that he was like later voted by a magazine the most Japanese man. They met at Toho Studio where like Kurosawa was a rising director, and Mifune came to an audition for a New Faces program. He didn't want to be an actor, he wanted to be a cameraman.
Incredible.
And so he like at his audition, there's like this great story that he was like, he did what he was told to do, and then he just sat there frustrated because he was like, I don't want to fucking impress you, judges. And they were like, wow, this guy is amazing. And a lot of this is detailed in this book called The Emperor and the Wolf by Stuart Galbraith IV, which is where a lot of this research is drawn from. They made 16 movies together. Then they stopped working together for complicated reasons. And then I would say after that, their careers and lives went in some weird directions that we might talk a little bit about later on. But very interesting guys. I would say arguably in some ways responsible for so many of the movies that we love, especially the movies that have like masculine archetypes in the late 20th century in them. And I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. Which brings us to like, why are you excited to talk about these movies, or why do you think we're talking about these guys, George?
Well,
or what is exciting
well,
to you
other
about
than
it?
the fact that these are some of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah, like that's the thing. We're not going to be spending a lot of time being like, oh, is this good? Like we know they're good.
Well,
they're really
I'm
good
just
movies.
really interested again in thinking about like the dynamic between these two artists, and thinking about the I just want to like spend more time with them and think about their relationship and how they work together. And I know this is kind of obviously like a simplistic thing, but to maybe think about, let's say, the dynamic between like the supposedly like cerebral Kurosawa and like the more like action kind of oriented Mifune,
right?
And to just think about how, again, like, what is it that the actor kind of allows the director to do and vice versa? Because one thing that I remember while watching Rashomon is just being like struck by how like terrifying he is in certain moments in that film.
Right.
And just remember, and it's been a while since I've seen it, and I can't wait to go back and see it. But I remember like really young George being like, this kind of like, there's nothing really scary happening on the screen, but this guy is like intense and he's intimidating.
Right.
And what's amazing about Mifune is that, so I've already watched Snow Trail, which we're going to talk about soon, but to think about that there's only, at least it's when they were released, there's only 3 years that are separating that movie from Rashomon. And that what Mifune does so incredibly well is that he inhabits the characters that, so basically what I'm trying to say is like he looks like he's a completely like different person in Rashomon than he does only 3 years prior in Snow Trail. Like he inhabits like the cynicism and the world-weary view of that character in Rashomon in such a way that like every single time he's on the screen, he just does like such a great job of like becoming those people.
That's really interesting. And the other thing that I would say with that, so as a side note, like one of the things that inspired us to do this was The Big Picture did an episode on around Mifune's birthday is in if I recall correctly, in April, and they did like an hour and a half episode on him, and that's worth listening to because they get into Mifune a lot, and that was a big inspiration for this. But I think to your point, he inhabits these characters, but like, so the other night I was watching this is ridiculous, but I watched 2 movies this week. I watched Air Force One starring Harrison Ford,
right,
which is not great. Except Gary Oldman kills it in that movie. And I watched Training Day with Denzel Washington. And I feel like what's kind of what makes people movie stars is like when you watch Harrison Ford play the president in Air Force One, you never forget it's Harrison Ford, but you're also like, that's the president of the United States. Same with Denzel Washington in Training Day, is that like he's playing Alonzo Harris, but you're also like, he never stops being Denzel Washington. And I think that that's kind of a movie star thing. And I feel like in some ways, Mifune might have been the first one to do that, but also be a remarkably expressive performer. Because like, I love Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart kind of just doing that same world-weary, cynical, quiet thing in basically every movie. John Wayne was John Wayne, but Mifune managed to do like serious, uptight businessman, crazy Kikuchi and Seven Samurai, but you were still the whole, like, I watched those movies and I'm like, that's Toshiro Mifune. Like, he never stops being Mifune, but he still manages to disappear into these movies.
Yeah, totally. And that's just, again, and for me, it's interesting again to think about at all moments, like Kurosawa behind the camera, and to then kind of think about, yeah, I guess just kind of like his vision of the world and what it is that he wants to kind of express. I mean, one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember when I watched Ron and then I did some research about it, he like tried to like kill himself, right? Like right before, I think.
Yes, he tried to.
Yeah, like,
Kurosawa tried to commit suicide.
Yeah, like I think before he made Ron, or maybe right after. But just to think about again, I don't know, just like there was such that information. I remember struck me in such a powerful way of like,
yeah,
I mean, obviously just because of like the sadness of like thinking about any person, right, who's driven to that point where they like they feel like they have to take their own lives,
right,
their own life, but also just thinking about again what, I don't know, just like his view of the world. Like he was always struck me to some degree as like a very humane filmmaker, but also somebody who would not shy away from like the darkness. So I know, like, for example, like in Rashomon, he was instructed to like change the ending because it was too depressing.
Dark.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I'm just kind of like curious to again like return to these films and think about them as I mean in a variety of ways, but also as existential dramas or existential views of the world.
And there certainly is that. And I think that like Kurosawa's, I'm curious, I think the thing that I'm most interested in that is like trying to figure out why and how Kurosawa used Mifune to express things that he wanted to say, because like they often will say that like an actor is a stand-in for a director, and I don't always know if that's true, but it's certainly something to talk about. And I do think that Kurosawa is interesting because if you read about Kurosawa's history, a lot of Japanese directors, contemporaries, or people after would say that his work was far too influenced by the West and that his sort of political opinions were problematic. He had a lot of issues with, there were a lot of sort of like, there was a lot of anti-union sentiment in the higher ups at Toho Studios where he made several of his films. But the flip side is that he never was particularly anti-union, but he wasn't pro-union. He's kind of an interesting figure in that sense. Like I think that a lot of Kurosawa's films are about the individual in society and how they function. And like, I think that has the potential to go a couple different ways, but like, he's sort of complex politically. I can't really speak to politics in Japan, but I can sort of speak to what historically he's kind of said and what he's known for. And so I'm curious to see how that stuff's reflected in the movies. And I think that his films really are largely like, there are a couple things. One thing that they definitely are is like hugely influential on Spielberg, on Lucas,
Scorsese,
on Clint Eastwood, Scorsese, because he sort of like made smart, prototypical action adventure great movies. But there's also other things going on. There's Shakespeare remakes. And
Dostoevsky,
there's two Shakespeare remakes. Dostoevsky is The Idiot, right?
Idiot, yeah.
There is a take on Maxim Gorky that we're going to look at. Bad Sleep Well is based on Hamlet. There's a lot of really interesting. He also made really contemporary films about a lot of his films are about post-war Japan and the chaos of that. You know, one interesting comparison that I saw recently was Stray Dog. There's no Uncut Gems without Stray Dog, which I thought was really interesting.
Wow, that's really fascinating too, because I totally also forgot that I've seen Throne of Blood and it fucking rocks.
Yeah, it's real good.
So fucking good. Oh god,
and I really think yeah, that one, and like I can't wait. I own High and Low on I think DVD or Blu-ray. Like I remember seeing High and Low and being like, holy shit, I don't know if there's like a Zodiac without High and Low. And I just think it's remarkably interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really curious about the what these films have to say politically, what their political relevance is now. Like, you know, the movie characters are as diverse as the films themselves. Businessmen protagonists, peasants that are protagonists, cops, gangsters, kings, all these things. I think there's a lot of interplay between those who have power and those who don't in his movies, certainly in Seven Samurai. Like, have you thought about that stuff at all?
I mean, again, so one of the things is that, so this is like new territory for us because, again, we're kind of like in a historical tradition and a kind of national tradition that is like totally foreign to us. So
totally.
I'm eager to,
which is tricky.
Yeah, I'm eager to like learn more about it and to try to like contextualize these films, to kind of think about them. I mean, obviously, like in some of the ways that you've talked about them, it will be much easier, I think, to make certain kind of claims, or to kind of like think about, like, like class dynamics, for example.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I'm just kind of interested in thinking about, I mean, it's not going to, I think, take a lot of imagination to think about, let's say, these films as attempting to reconsider or reconstruct Japanese history and society post World War II. I mean, I think that's like an obvious thing to kind of like take on or to consider. So to think about, let's say, those historical movies like the samurai films or the movies that take us back into the past, and to think about like what might those films be trying to say about contemporary, let's say, post-war Japanese society, or the post-war world in its entirety, these are films are like potentially like allegorical in that kind of sense. But also, just very briefly to speak to something you said, that Kurosawa is like the first filmmaker for me that I was like I think I might have approached in a serious way as a kind of as an avatar for world cinema. I think he was
Me too.
He was the first one that I was like, oh, okay, like there are people in different national contexts, like outside of the United States, and they're making these incredibly fucking awesome and complex films, and they have been obviously for decades. So for me, he's an important filmmaker because he introduced me to that, like, that world.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I would have started to like watch movies. I don't know if I would have like moved to New York and gotten interested in films and gone to study film if it weren't for him. I think that's like a huge component of my identity. And I also think, to that point, like, I feel like when you're young and you get exposed to world cinema, and again, the emphasis being on you're young, I don't know if I've ever really considered these films politically or socially before. I've just kind of viewed them as movies and like divorced from a context, because my brain didn't work that way. So it'll be interesting to look back at them. But definitely, I think like hugely important to like my formative understanding of what movies are and what they kind of can be, to some extent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
And also, I just think like I was thinking a little bit about the scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark when Indiana Jones gets approached by the guy with the sword, and the guy does all the weird sword moves, and then Indiana Jones just blows him away. Right. I just feel like you can draw a line between that and Mifune.
Huh. Oh, like the coolness, like, just and like that kind the swagger, of style,
yeah. The sardonic, yeah, and the kind of like cynicism. I mean, like, Star Wars, for example, is in my mind, like a shot-for-shot remake of The Hidden Fortress. I don't know the last time you watched The Hidden Fortress, but it almost is hard to watch because you're like, this is Star Wars. Like, this is Star Wars.
Yeah, no, so. It's definitely, I guess, homage to be kind, the ripoff to be mean.
I think, yeah. I mean, it definitely put it in a new context, but yeah, I think it's going to be interesting because we'll talk a little bit about the episodes we're going to do in a second, but like, we're not looking at anything that is at least we're only looking at one film that's kind of contemporary, and I feel like it's going to be interesting to reflect on like the idea of being able to go like, oh, for example, like the Safdie brothers probably saw Stray Dog and it influenced influenced them in making Good Time or Uncut Gems. Jeez, how did I forget about literally my favorite movie?
It's on Netflix now too.
Should we go through the films we're going to cover real quick, just so everybody knows, and we can talk a little bit about some of our guests? Our guests for this season are crazy.
We got them all.
They're all here.
All your faves.
Ronald McDonald, the Hamburglar,
Grimace. Isn't Chewbacca really just a grimace?
You shut your mouth. The people of Kashyyyk did not die for you to make a Chewbacca grimace joke, okay? So we're going to start the season off with the first collaboration between Toshiro Mifune and Akira Kurosawa, a movie called Drunken Angel. And this is crazy. Our guest for that episode, George, you know who our guest for that episode is?
No.
It is Stuart Galbraith IV, the guy who literally wrote the book.
He wrote he did.
On Toshiro Mifune and Akira Kurosawa, called Emperor and the Wolf. He's also in the Last Samurai documentary, Mifune, the Last Samurai, that is on Criterion and that I plan to check out very, very soon. We're going to follow that up with Quiet Duel from 1949, which is the second collaboration between Akira Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune. I promise not to say like I'm not going to be like the 15th collaboration. We're going to do an episode on some early Kurosawa and Mifune, Sanshiro Sugata and Snow Trail, which we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Stray Dog, which is the third collaboration between Toshiro Mifune and Akira Kurosawa. We're going to talk about Scandal. We're going to talk about Rashomon with Alyssa Wilkinson, the critic.
I love that John Lovett's animated show, The Critic.
Yeah, but she's not on that. She is a critic and professor. She's over at Vox, and she's great.
She's a great writer,
She picked Rashomon, so we're excited about that. We're going to talk about No Regrets for Our Youth, which is an early Kurosawa film that does not star Mifune, so it's not a collaboration between Toshiro Mifune and Akira Kurosawa. We're going to talk about The Idiot with A.S. Hamra, who's the critic for The Baffler, and wrote a really wonderful book called The Earth Dies Streaming, which is full of short and snippy and amazing film reviews. Our old pal Blake Howard from All the President's Minutes is going to join us for The Seven Samurai, which is a great movie. And
it's an amazing movie.
I feel like Blake really likes movies about masculinity. We've talked about this before, like Men in Crisis. And I think that is a good... That's a good Men in Crisis kind of movie, don't you think?
No doubt. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so that's going to be really, really good. Next up, what's next? What do we have next? Let me open there's the tab. We're going to talk about Wedding Ring, which is an early Mifune movie from 1952. We're going to talk about I Live in Fear, which, have you seen I Live in Fear?
I have not, no.
Oh, dude. It is great. It's a very, very, very contemporary. I think watching that movie now, especially because that episode comes out 5 days after the election, probably. God. And it's about wanting to leave your country because of fear of what's going to happen to it. It's going to be an interesting movie to watch.
I've been feeling that.
We're going to follow that up with Throne of Blood.
Can't wait.
The Macbeth adaptation with Isaac Butler, who did a podcast for Slate about Shakespeare. That's really interesting. It's called Lend Me Your Ears, and it is a look at Shakespeare and politics and political currents. And I know Isaac a little bit. He's a cool dude. And he wrote a book about angels in America called The World Only Spins Forward.
Love it.
And he co-hosts the Slate Working podcast. So I messaged him. I was like, hey, do you want to come talk? And he was like, yes, I absolutely want to talk about Throne of Blood. So that's cool. Ikiru we're going to do. The Lower Depths we're going to do. We're going to talk about The Hidden Fortress with Randy Wilkins, filmmaker who was recently on our
Joker episode.
Episode. Randy loves Star Wars and Hidden Fortress. Randy and I talk about Star Wars a lot. And Randy didn't like Last Jedi, but nobody's perfect. And we're going to do a bonus episode on Star Wars.
Yay.
Because why not? Why wouldn't we talk about Star Wars? We're going to talk about the bad...
Lots of Grimace and Chewbacca talk on that one.
Yeah, there's a ton of it.
Have you ever noticed how Chewbacca is just like a Grimace? What kind of creature is Grimace, by the way?
I'm really glad that you're interrupting my list of the movies.
You've only been talking for 25 minutes.
Your riff on Grimace. We're going to do The Bad Sleep Well. We're going to do Yojimbo with my friend Jessica Montoya, who's a camera person and a filmmaker and is great. We're going to talk about Ran, which is not a Mifune movie, but it rules. We're going to talk about Sanjuro, the sequel to Yojimbo. This is very exciting. We're going to talk about maybe my most favoritist movie ever, High and Low or Heaven and Hell, with Bilche Abiri from Vulture. Great critic. We're going to talk about Red Sun. We're going to talk about Redbeard, and we might even talk about Akira Kurosawa's Dreams.
I'm just amazed at all of these, like really, again, these super... I mean, this is more testament to who you are, Liam, but that all these amazing people want to be on our podcast.
I know, yeah. I don't know what... they're just really great people and they love movies. Yeah. And, I mean, we should probably at some point just be like, we're not going to talk. You guys just go at it. We're going to sit here
I swear
quietly.
Also to stop asking, I guess after the third or fourth guest we have on, if our guests know what kind of creature Grimace is. I promise not to keep asking. Be like, so yeah,
welcome to the podcast.
Randy, you're an Emmy nominated, an Emmy award-winning director. You've done amazing work, but what kind of creature do you think Grimace is?
Wait, I thought this was about Welcome to Grimace Gab, a new podcast hosted by George
a
Fragopoulos.
Zodiac-like procedural where I have like pictures of Grimace all over my apartment, just like staring into his blank, empty like.
I need to look. You like? I love the idea that like cut to black, flash forward 3 years. You like walk into a hardware store.
A McDonald's, you idiot! Yeah, I walk into a McDonald's. There's a Grimace there. I'm like, you piece of shit! I'm gonna fucking figure this out. If it takes me the rest of my goddamn life.
He kind of looks like an eggplant.
Sitting at home,
He's like an eggplant.
Sitting at home with my wife. She's like complaining about the fact that I don't like do the dishes, take care of the kids. And I'm like, honey, I think I'm really close.
There's like a picture of a purple shape on your wall and a question mark next to it, and then like a series of like lists of species and stuff like that.
My phone is vibrating, and my wife is like, "Is that the Hamburglar again? Are you still texting him about?"
I love the idea that your phone rings late at night and you answer it and you're like, "Hello," and then you just hear. And it's someone eating a hamburger, and you're like, "Is that you motherfucker?"
Are you eating a Big Mac right now?
Is Grimace can eat hamburger? It's like he's not eating himself, right?
No, he's like, well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Is wait, so this is a new wrinkle? Is he like a hamburger come to life? No, no, that's a Mayor McCheese. Mayor McCheese is the hamburger come
You know
to
what
life.
the problem is that I'm going to send this to our guests to listen to, and they're going to be like, I was really into your show until you talked about Grimace for 4 minutes in the middle of it.
Be like,
oh my God.
On second thought, actually, I'm not going to be coming onto your show. It might have something to do with the fact that
I thought this was a serious film podcast that didn't talk about.
But that Fragopoulos guy will not
Grimace.
shut the fuck up about Grimace.
Yeah, this is terrible.
But anyway,
I need to look him in his purple eyes.
His blank purple eyes.
It's going to be a great season. It's going to be really, really good. All Grimace talk aside.
I'm excited.
Oh man, that was funny. I don't really have anything else to say. We're gonna dig into this, and it's gonna be interesting. Also, I know I said it before, and not to darken the mood, but this is gonna take us into 2021 this season.
Oh yeah.
So let's hope that there's still a ability to make and talk about ideas then in 2021. We don't. But it's gonna be interesting to be looking at these films over the course of the next several months.
Fingers crossed for a vaccine and social justice by the time we're done with.
Oh yeah, no, it's all yeah. I mean, I think that this is really going to push it over the over the star line. All right. Well, I think we wrap it up before we hit the 30-minute mark. Look at us. We're doing good.
Nailing it.
I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Fragopoulos.
And I'm Grimace. Son of a bitch. He's here. He's been here the whole time.
The call is coming from inside the room.
This was
Oeuvre Busters.
Bye. I'll get you, Grimace.
I'll get you, you fucking...